All right. Now, this is the grand poobah of all of it right here. The largest plane on the moon is not an impact crater. Now here it says in the Nature Science Journal, gravity data suggest flats of volcanic basalt formed from tectonic stretching, which is a lot of gobbledygook to explain that there is a gigantic frickin' square made out of the craters that we see every time we look at the moon. When you look at it, you see that if you tilt it a little bit different from where we see it on Earth, you got the man on the moon there, he's got the big head, and then he's got that little trail of him throwing toys into his bag, right? That's what they always used to call it in the astronomy magazines I had. He's throwing toys into his bag, but the toy path over the top of his head there is actually the top of a square. And so what we're seeing here, and there's the space.com calls it a strikingly geometric shape hidden on the surface of the moon. That's that red box. That's a square. That's the angle of the moon as we see it from Earth. And they've known this, obviously, because they've been sending people up to the moon ever since at least Apollo and Mercury. Now they decide to tell us 40 years later? Why did they wait so long? You can't handle the truth, right? Well, now they think you can. So what is this really saying? When you see this huge frickin' square, or what they're actually calling a rectangular structure, this suggests that it's artificial, that somebody built it. That the moon might be a massive technological artifact. And look at that. I mean, that diagram right there, you see the square so clearly. It's just so obvious. Just like, as I said, these square craters on Eros 433, same thing. So that square literally covers a huge portion of the moon's entire surface, and it may be the exposed substructure of what is inside the moon. As the dust gets blown off, it may be that it's almost like a balloon, and as craters hit the moon, they're bouncing off of this thing, kicking the dust up, and now what you see is the seas, or the mares, is the remaining superstructure once all the dust has been cleared away. And it definitely shows us the square shape in the underlying geometry that it was made from. So we were only told, humanity was only told, that the moon has a gigantic geometric shape, a perfect square, as of October 1st, 2014. So it seems that somebody is doing disclosure deliberately and getting us to know things. And so this is the shattered leftovers, like you're seeing here as the sun is setting on the horizon. The shattered leftovers of the glass that still can be seen. The entire northern third of Africa was completely wiped out in the blast, leaving behind what we now call the Sahara Desert. You dig down 40 to 300 feet, and there's all kinds of toys there. Now notice, this is the only part of the Earth that looks like that. Do you see that? It's this big, huge desert. Like everything else has been undisturbed, and probably if you waited another 500,000 years or something, you know, it's going to come back. But this is only about, we estimate, based on multiple insiders I've talked to and trying to thread it with what was said in the Edgar Cayce readings and what was said in the Law of One, it appears that this happened 50,000 years ago. That this was the first big Atlantis on Earth that was wiped out 50,000 years ago, which both books, both the Edgar Cayce readings and the Law of One, point to a major, major war around that time that took place. As I said, the highlands of the original civilization was Egypt, and so they then built out stuff over what was originally there. So the Sphinx appears to be a recarving of an older monument, and the Great Pyramid is built on a big, big ridge of rock underneath. So as I said before, there's tons of technological artifacts under there. 30 to 400. I have to change that data based on new information. And the Egyptian priesthood went around and found some of these old books from people who were out there in our solar system. We're losing light. That's kind of interesting. So maybe they're trying to tell me something, that we're running out of time here. How much time do we have? We got, yeah, we're actually 9 minutes past where we would be. Anyway. Yeah, we got more to do. So So what we find out is that the Library of Alexandria in Egypt was the storehouse for all these archaeological expeditions they were doing, finding these books that were made out of pages of almost unbreakable material, like made out of something like Kevlar. And that the books were then stored in the Library of Alexandria, which once it was invaded by the Romans, they did a false flag and they burned only things like census documents and tax forms and kept all the good stuff and brought it to, guess where? The Vatican Library. So one of my oldest insiders, Dr. Pete Peterson, was invited to go to the Vatican Library and allowed to read some of these old books, and he said that some of them had like barcodes on them, and all it was digital looking code on every page. Some of them had very elaborate images of spaceships and space stations and bases inside moons and all this stuff. And the Egyptian priests had been able to translate some of this stuff, and so there were also books of translations in ancient Egyptian language and Greek and Roman, things like this, of what the actual original books said. So the books tend to have a solid color on them, like you'll have a blue cover or a red cover that's all leather. The books tend to have a buckle on them, so you actually can buckle it like your pants to keep it closed. And again, most of the pages are kind of like an off-white color, and they're made of some kind of indestructible material. There's also a whole series of books that are made out of metallic plates that have engravings on them. So this is something that's being kept in the Vatican Library. They don't want us to know because it has the history of these people. Now, if you hear about the Illuminati, if you watch the movie Eyes Wide Shut, you hear about something called the Saturn cult and the Festival of Saturnalia. Why? Because these people trace themselves back to the progenitors who had originally settled on Saturn. So if you look in Eyes Wide Shut, when they're all wearing the masks, they do this dance where they go around in a circle, and that emulates the rings of Saturn orbiting. Because they trace themselves as the descendants of Saturn, and they believe that they're different from the rest of us, that they have extraterrestrial DNA that made them the gods. And that kind of is segueing into the next part of our talk. So there were a very small number of survivors when the moon was blown up, and they got out with only, apparently the story is, the moon was so badly hit that only a few of their damaged spacecraft got out, and their civilization on Earth was almost completely wiped out, so just a small number of them made it, and they crash-landed on Earth. And they then interbred with humans, which they were specifically warned not to do, and this created what we call in the book of Enoch, the fallen angels. Their offspring, their children most likely, the hybrids of their own form, which was about 36 feet tall, and native people on Earth, became these 12 to 13 foot tall, red-headed, white-skinned humans. And white skin was not normal for the Earth. And this is preserved in a book that the Vatican did not want you to read, that wasn't even found until the 1800s, but it's very old. It's as old as the book of Genesis, called the Book of Enoch. It's a very, very important text. And I'm going to be doing a lot more about this as I go on, probably writing it into my books. The Scottish explorer James Bruce discovered a copy, several copies of it in Ethiopia in 1773. It was translated in 1821, and Jesus quotes from this book in the New Testament, so he obviously thought it was pretty important. The key chapters are chapters 1 through 36, called the Book of the Watchers, and it says that this man, Enoch, was Noah's grandfather, and that he lived for 365 years, so he was some kind of extraterrestrial. Enoch acts as a messenger for what appear to be benevolent extraterrestrials who had threatened these people on Earth, the Watchers, with total destruction that became Noah's flood. But before the flood, before their civilization was wiped out again, because we're now talking about 12,000 years ago, the big Atlantean flood, they used Enoch as a messenger to kind of cut a deal with the good guys, the benevolent ETs, and say, would you please not destroy us? In this book, the Book of Enoch, it says that there was only 200 of them that descended. They became the fallen angels. Lucifer was one of the fallen angels, interestingly enough. He was the leader. The insiders I've spoken to have said it's probably a lot more than 200, that they had interbred here for some time. They had huge population numbers again, and this event, Noah's flood, completely wiped them out. It says in 7:5 to 6 that they were cannibals. They began eating us. And they begged God for forgiveness in 13:4, and they were turned down, obviously. And then a great flood was created to cleanse the earth of these so-called watchers, which they're still pissed off about and still punishing us for all these years later. Because we, i.e. non-extraterrestrial humans, were God's chosen, and they were the fallen angels, the cast-outs. So now they feel like they need to get revenge on us, and that we are the wicked and they are the just. And what does the Bible say? That the money will be taken from the wicked and given to the just. Well, that's how they justify the economic redistribution that they've done with things like the Federal Reserve, the IMF, the World Bank, and the Bank for International Settlements. Now you see why I wanted to leak this all on stage at once. Okay? Stuff like this. But some of these people never died out completely. In fact, they've been around up until very recently in some cases. Let's look at the example of Easter Island. Jacob Roggeveen and C.F. Behrens, two Dutch explorers, visited there on Easter Island, first people from the West to get there, 1722. And when they got there, they saw 12-foot-tall white men with red hair that had long earlobes, just like you see in the sculptures. And then they were peacefully coexisting with the natives that were called Hanau Monoko. So you have these two different groups, Hanau Epe and Hanau Momoko. And the natives had shorter ears, darker skin, and a typical human height. So they actually, these giants actually spoke to the explorers. Apparently something happened afterwards where they were removed. And this brings us to a very interesting and highly controversial thing. It's probably going to get me in a lot of trouble, which is the subject of stasis beings. What the heck are stasis beings? Apparently some of the oldest people who got to the earth, and this may be the progenitors, we don't really know. They had a very advanced crystal technology, and they left these crystal artifacts all around the interior of the earth, deep, deep underground, in underground bases and things like that, in some cases natural caverns. You have these crystals that in some cases will glow with a blue light, and they can actually effectively create a time bubble where time basically stops inside the bubble. So you can then get inside this bubble when you activate the crystal properly, and there's obviously some kind of like a timer so you can get set up properly and then wait for the time bubble to kick on, and then the time bubble essentially keeps you so that you only experience like a few weeks, but it could be thousands of years on Earth. Now, there are apparently at least a dozen different stasis being areas around the Earth, as well as others where the crystals collapsed and didn't work. One of these stasis being chambers was found in Ohio, and I have now called it the Illuminati Disneyland. The reason why I say this is that you go into this, there's a river in Ohio apparently, there's a mouth down at the bottom, a big cave opening, you go in there, you walk in a long way, and then eventually what you see is a room that's about 60 to 100 feet tall, it's a dome, it's got black tar painted around the inside, and in the middle are three sarcophagi that are in kind of a Y shape around this thing in the middle that's a big crystal hanging on these supports with 4 poles, 4 pillars. The crystal is glowing, and there's some kind of time bubble that you can't get through. It has like a gravitational field. So they had to climb up the side and build like a scaffolding so they could look down and see what was inside these sarcophagi. And what did they see? They saw apparently perfectly preserved giant humans who were around 12 feet tall, 3 of them, all males with red hair, long beards, and, of course, still in stasis and still sleeping. Yes, and here's the crazy part. All these Illuminati guys were going to see it, and they were writing their names on the side of the cave to kind of like tag it, you know, like graffiti. And the name that a lot of people at the higher levels hear, the most notable name on that wall, guess who it was? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln saw the stasis beings at Illuminati Disneyland. Now imagine the power of being in this group where you are told that you are the descendants of these gods, and you can go to a site like this that has a clearly advanced technology For people in the 1700s or the 1800s, they didn't have anything like a glowing light. They didn't even have electric light. They just had fire. You have this glowing crystal suspended with these weird like wires or something hanging off of these 4 posts in the middle, and these people in sarcophagi that are giants with red hair, and they're still sleeping, and they look like they could come back to life. So this is where the Illuminati legend came into play, that, hey, these are our ancestors. These are our own family members. And the curious part is that different stasis chambers have been found all over the Earth, and in the different areas we find different types of humanoid extraterrestrials. They're not all the same. So it seems like multiple different groups found these time crystals and built stasis chambers, and the belief also is that the crystals are programmed to end their stasis as this energetic activation takes place in our solar system. So the Illuminati belief also is that as we get to the end of the cycle, these beings will reawaken, and that is the return of their gods. So it's a great story that they've obviously gotten really invested in. And some of this information appears to now be leaked because we have things like this. This video appears to be taken from one of these types of extraterrestrial visitors. I'm going to show you the video now. He's in this weird being. Look at the eyes. It's got some kind of coins on his eyes. This is from Russia. You got this fish on his chest. It's got, look at that, cuneiform writing on the fish, so it's Sumerian based. And you see he's got this winged eagle on his waist there, and he's inside a sarcophagus that is totally lined with gold. He has a beard, he has a crown on as well, and this is a being that is obviously mummified, but he's in a very, very good state of preservation, isn't he? I mean, now some of these stasis beings, apparently, they really do look very, very well preserved. So this is one example. And again, you see the cuneiform writing there. It's just like the Sumerians would have. But now here is another example, again, that was leaked from Russia. It's very likely that this is real. He may have been in the process of waking up. And this was leaked to me through the insiders. It is online, but most people would have no idea what they're seeing. This stasis being has a beautiful crown on, as you can see here. And he looks fast asleep. Apparently he is waking up. He's got all these very cool solid gold artifacts around him, which we're going to see in the video in a minute here. And this was apparently on the cover of the sarcophagus that he was found in. Looks like a very interesting combination of Sumerian and Egyptian iconography. Now, this apparently is true, that as he was starting to become unfrozen. This is probably somebody from the inside that was doing this, or it could be a hoax. We don't really know. But he appears to have longer hair on his chest than we do, and his body is still soft, and it looks like flesh. You see that? This is very, very strange and creepy. I understand that. But these are the stasis beings. And so now I'm going to show you the video, and it's a long video. So it takes about 3 minutes and 52 seconds. So we're not going to watch the entire thing. But I want to just check this out with you. So here's some of the Egyptian. You see that? It looks like an Egyptian pharaoh, like a female pharaoh there. And now you see they have the newspaper held up against his body for comparison. You can see there's this gold stuff over there on the left. And then look at all these statues that you got there. You got this weird-looking guy on the left there with 2 serpents, one on either side of his shoulders. And he seems like he's got a strange face. You have this Egyptian pharaoh-looking woman coming out of a jar there. There's the guy with the funny face. Notice he has an elongated skull. You see the elongated skull on that guy there? And we're seeing that he's got a very long beard with nice brown hair. He's got this very lush golden crown that has curious shapes and curious structures on it. Here's the Arabic newspaper, and notice there's Sumerian cuneiform again on that gold plate that the newspaper has been put on top of. So now we're seeing it coming up from a different angle. You can see the top of the sarcophagus there. You can see he's got an image of the sun on his headdress. Now this has leaked a few places online, but hardly anybody knows what they're looking at. I did have somebody send me this video before I knew what it was. I said, I don't know. But now I've been told this is almost certainly something that's genuine. Notice the date of the video is 2002. It's nothing new. So this has been held on reserve for a long time, and yet we're only now hearing about it 13 years later. So there's some sort of weird paper, and there you see he's got some kind of armband on his left arm, and it's got some Egyptian-looking symbols on it. Now you can kind of see there's a big plate there with an Egyptian pharaoh woman on it, and a statue to the left. There's another good shot of his headdress that does appear to have feathers on top, suggesting he might have come in a flying craft. And there you get a really good shot of the woman. She looks very Egyptian, doesn't she? And yet this is not supposed to be where the Egyptians were. So this is some very curious stuff. And again, there's, can't really make out, oh, it looks like there's a bird of fire on there, the phoenix on that one. Now they again zoom in close on the Arabic newspaper. You see the Sumerian cuneiform on the metallic plate that's been put over his chest, the symbol of the sun there. Here's another shot of the metallic plate taken from a side angle and his chest. And it goes on from there. So you've kind of seen the whole interior now, so we'll just keep on going. So here's my bad joke of the night. We're going to give you a giant anthropology lesson. Oh, man. Okay, so you saw there was a lot of Sumerian-looking stuff. Well, the Sumerians appeared to be quite giant, and this is where the Anunnaki story comes from. Here you have Inanna, and notice that she's got her foot on a lion, and the lion is a 9-foot cat. So you're looking at a 12 to 13-foot tall human here. No, she doesn't look reptilian. She has a human face, but that lion is dwarfed by her. Then you have this guy on the throne, and the guys on the left are dwarfed by him. Again, suggesting that the original people who were here, who were apparently cannibals in the Book of the Watchers, were giants. Now, a lot of times on the old Egyptian walls, you see depictions of different types of humanoids, including humanoids with bird heads. These beings apparently are real, and they're called the avians. There are certain types of ETs that do have bird heads. They don't really look like that. This appears to be an oral legend, not based on eyewitness sightings, but there are actually people that have those bird heads out there. Notice, of course, here that in this temple, look at the height of the doorway. You see the people walking in? You see how much that dwarfs them? That would be perfect for these Anunnaki gods to show up. Now, the original Egyptian god Osiris apparently was very tall, had green skin, had an elongated skull that you see on that hat, and next to the Sphinx he built this stone structure, the Osirian, as you see right here, which is made out of huge blocks, some of which are 100 tons. Notice that he is pictured with some of these people that have like the bird heads. There's an avian there on the right. You got a guy that looks like a native there who has brown skin. Then you have a woman on the left who looks really a lot shorter than Osiris. She's only about half his height compared to him sitting on that throne. And notice again he has the elongated skull. So that's one of the original pharaohs, and over time as they stay on Earth, the Earth's energy fields get to them and they lose their height. That's one of the first things that apparently happens. But for the most part, they retain the elongated skull. So Akhenaten, 15th dynasty now, so 15 generations after Osiris, they've gotten a lot shorter. He lost the green skin, but he's still got the incredible skull. This is a sculpture of Akhenaten. And notice that his hat actually looks like the edge of a UFO, suggesting that he came in a craft that was aerodynamic like that. Very interesting headdress. This is his wife, Nefertiti, drawn with an elongated skull. Another shot apparently of Nefertiti or one of their kids, maybe Ramses. Here's another shot of Nefertiti with the elongated skull. You'll see this happens over and over again. And then what do? They call this an artistic style. This is their daughter Meritaten. Now, do you really think that if a guy was commissioned to do a royal sculpture and he screwed up the way your head looks this much, and he cuts off all your hair, and he doubles the length of your cranium to create this weird, superhuman-looking monstrosity, if that wasn't the way they really looked, do you think he would have gotten out of that room alive? No, you're seeing it, and the Illuminati laugh at you. Because this is right out there at the German museum, the Berlin National Museum, and people say, oh, it was just an artistic style. No, this is the big secret of the Illuminati. This is their daughter thinking that it would look sexy to stick a piece of hair on one side of her bald head. I don't know. I think she ought to work on that look a little bit. I'm not really feeling it. Just call me crazy. Notice also this is Nefertiti's body, that she has apparently a longer spine than we do and more weight around the midsection. They all seem to have this funny little pot belly and a very narrow rib cage. It's different physiology. They're not quite the same. There's another shot of them with this really narrow rib and then the funny pot belly. Now here we see on the right people with elongated skulls, and on the left people bowing to them in supplication who have normal skulls. And notice that all the people with elongated skulls have winged discs that they're wearing on their heads, suggesting that they got here originally long ago in flying discs, and they are the descendants of the gods. The Illuminati trace themselves as the descendants of these people. Another strange place where we may have evidence of giants is the Cycladic Islands in Greece, the Cyclades, in which these weird sculptures show up that have no background, and they have these weird stylized heads. So here's a guy strumming some kind of harp or something, and notice the hat that he's wearing and the shape of his hands. This is actually Baal, the Roman god of the underworld. We'll get to him in a minute. So here's this Cycladic figurine strumming some kind of musical instrument, and they have this weird stylized look that again clearly suggests this is like an artistic rendering of somebody with an elongated skull, just like you see right here, where you have Meritaten's granite bust, and then that shows what the hats that they wear would look like worn on top of her head. So here is the Roman god Baal, the god of the underworld. Now he was a giant. The eyewitness reports of Baal were that he was very large, 12 feet tall, and notice that he's got this ring around his elbow. That apparently is a technology that allows him to create telekinesis, to levitate objects, and to overpower people telepathically with his mind. So these sculptures are based on what people were seeing. And the one in the middle there is our good old friend from the Bohemian Grove. You know him as Moloch. That's right, the owl-headed god. So here he's got a bull head, but it's the same guy. So these people were wearing masks in some cases. They came here, and they were the giants, and they wanted human sacrifice. So look at this big guy on the throne, and there has been a war going on to stop this kind of bullshit from happening. And these people have now had their ass kicked. These giants are not on Earth anymore. We've gotten rid of them. But the war still isn't over. It's still ongoing. And apparently these giants, these Anunnaki, are still working through our governments and still trying to win this war that they now know they cannot win because it's too late for them. Once this solar system change happens, it's all over. So here's a few more images of this very giant warlord, this evil god that wanted human sacrifice, Baal. And you can see that in every image he has this weird elongated skull, just like you see with the Egyptian pharaohs. Now some of the good guys appear to be the ones from the Indian tradition. We have blue skin. Humans don't have blue skin, at least not here. The Maya have Quetzalcoatl, a white-skinned, bearded god where nobody else had white skin. The Japanese were civilized by these folks called the Dogu, who look very different from us. That's an understatement. Plus they're wearing some really cool space uniform. The Dogon, Dogon, interesting. In Africa, this is a sculpture of them. Don't those eyes look awful familiar? So there's been a lot of ETs that have showed up all over the planet. The Australians have the Wandjina. Oh, they got stuck with the bad end of the stick on that one, didn't they? We don't like those types. Let's get those out of here. Now I want to show you that in addition to these paintings and sculptures, we have actual skeletons. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Most of these represent the long-aged descendants of the original giants when they've gotten down to our human height now, but they still retain the elongated skulls. Look at that skull in the middle. Look at how much larger that head is than the others. There's nothing natural about that. That is a totally different form. And that one on the left, they're trying to say that that's the result of head binding? Yeah. Yeah, right. Just tie some boards on your baby's head when he's born, and you're going to double or triple the height of his skull. Yeah, I'm not buying it. Something's going on here, folks, as you can see. These are the descendants of the giants. And this guy, Brian Forster, has been doing an amazing job of putting all this stuff together and finding new examples of these weird skulls. Now, even Discover magazine, mainstream science, wrote about these so-called Boskop skulls, in which they totally show the difference between a regular human skull and the Boskops, which would have a brain size twice ours. So the least intelligent of them would have a 300 IQ. And they describe how these skulls have been found all over the planet, and they say it appears to be some different type of human life. Here's another example of giant skulls, this time found in a place in Siberia called Omsk. The skulls were so abnormal, so weird and scary looking, that the guys who found them actually started crying and quit their jobs. And if you got a job in Russia, that's a darn good thing to have. So this is not something that normally would happen. But they were freaked out. Because as you can see by the guy holding that in his hand, there's nothing normal about that skull at all. This was taken from a documentary on television about King Tut, the real King Tut. Again, looking and seeing an elongated skull. And this is actually a shot of people who still have elongated skulls, Boskop characteristics, in Africa. Certain tribes apparently still have the elongated skull. And it says it is censored. This is the only picture like it I could find. There's a little white box over her nipple that says censor, spelled S-E-N-S-O-R. Yeah, okay. I didn't do that. Okay, that's not me. Don't blame me. This is the only version of the picture I could find. And here's another one where the baby has got a very interesting hair, braided hair, going way, way up its skull. This is not normal. Now, this is 14th century Italian nobility. Remember, the Illuminati have said that they are the descendants of the giants. Turns out this bloodline, the D'Este bloodline, is the central root that connects to all the different European Illuminati families. And they come out of Rome. Well, let's take a look at a picture of these people who like to stay low and undercover and notice if there's anything a little bit different about them. Whoa. Now you see why I wanted to leak all this on stage at once? I was looking at this picture at the airport, and I looked around at everybody's head I could find, just to see if anybody had that elongated skull at the airport. I couldn't find one dude or one woman that had this. Now, apparently, there's a lot of these types of people at the Vatican. They're called the Jesuits, and they wear those elongated hats at the Vatican, right? So they can walk around and blend in with the rest of us, and nobody suspects anything because they're always wearing the long hat to hide that skull. Okay, now these types of people will usually never run for office. They stay undercover. They stay in the background. We've had multiple insiders say that they have met with people who still have elongated skulls like this and are high-level insider Illuminatus people. And again, they look like the Egyptian pharaoh skulls. Same type of thing. The Huns, the original Mongolian invaders that conquered as they went to the west, also seem to have these elongated skulls and were descendants of giants as well. Now here's a series of Italian coins that all very clearly show his elongated skull. Most likely he's wearing a wig and he's bald, just like she apparently was bald. You could see she had hardly any hair. And the hairline on his wig doesn't look that good. It's just kind of like a straight line. So they didn't put a lot of work into this. It was the 1400s. I mean, cut him a break. Right? So this is very unusual, but this was probably one of the last times these people came out in the open. So up until the 1700s, these giants were still walking around in America. And if you do some digging, the New York Times has some articles that show us these giant skeletons. November 21st, 1856, from the New York Times, we see the description of a skeleton that was found 10 feet 9 inches in length. December 25th, 1868, there was an expedition found in Minnesota by the Sank Rapids Water Power Company, and they were quarrying rock, and they found a 10-foot, 9.5-inch tall skeleton, and the bones alone weighed 364.25 pounds. And they say the body must have weighed at least 900 pounds, so this was a giant. New York Times, September 8th, 1871. Here it is right here. You can look this up. They're still available on the New York Times website said that they found giant skulls where the bone itself was nearly an inch thick. Pretty crazy. And the body was 8 or 9 feet tall. There's nobody like that here now, not even basketball players. New York Times, February 8th, 1876, as you can see right here. 3 skeletons were found nearly 9 feet in height in this one dig. Then we have August 10th, 1880. And in this one, we see that there were skeletons that were 11 feet, 3 inches long when they were found. May 25th, 1882. This was a mound that was 60 feet in diameter and 12 feet high, in which they found giant skeletons inside. November 20th, and you're going to see this mound thing over and over again. There's lots of mounds that have been built in America. They've all been suppressed. We can hear a little bit about it, but the whole science has been erased by the descendants of the Cabal, Freemasons, Illuminati. They don't want you to know about this. But there's mounds all over America, specifically in Ohio, Wisconsin, West Virginia are some of the biggest places, on through Pennsylvania, even New York in some places, the New York State. So here we got November 20th, 1883. And in this case, they unearthed a 7-foot skeleton in a 50-foot mound. And May 5th, 1885, as you see right here, a small mound. Oh yeah, that was me working too fast. A small mound in Ohio with 4 huge skeletons, 7 to 8 feet tall, inside the mound, along with a whole bunch of cool things that it had included. So these giants, when they died, they'd bury themselves in these mounds, and we're now finding all these giant skeletons, and this is published in mainstream news. February 9th, 1890. Here again, this is in Pleasantville, New Jersey now. And what we see here is that they had a large mound with 8 bodies, 7 to 8 feet in height, and over 50 bodies in the mound altogether. You're probably starting to ask yourself, where the heck did all these skeletons go? Well, the Cabal created this thing called the Smithsonian Institution. And they say, oh, bring everything to the Smithsonian. We'll take care of it. It was the best false flag ever, because the Smithsonian got all of those things, and now it is illegal to own or to publicly display any giant skeletons because it's considered desecrating Native American ruins. So there's a law on the books that makes it illegal for you to ever have any of these on display. August 10th, 1891. The Wisconsin Mounds, Elaborate Systems of Defensive Works. August 10th, 1881. And they're talking here about the Fort Aztalan Pyramid Mounds in Wisconsin. There's 2 straight lines of mounds. Each straight line crosses over in an X pattern, and they go across 50 miles. So this suggests a great deal of intelligence behind the way they were being built. And it forms a great St. Andrew's Cross. Well, St. Andrew's Cross, for those of you who don't know, is the official flag of Scotland, and it is based on St. Andrew, who was crucified and killed on the cross and apparently did ascend, hence he became a saint. And for those in the audience who happen to be into BDSM, you may already know that BDSM practitioners love to get a beating on a St. Andrew's cross. So when I started Googling this up, I found lots and lots of pictures like this, and this was probably about the cleanest one I can show you. And by the way, he is wearing, what is that, SpongeBob SquarePants underwear? No, it's Scooby-Doo underwear. And he says on the blog post that his buttocks were completely purple after this young lady had lots of fun doing what she was doing. So he probably didn't want to sit down for a while, but I guess that was his enjoyment, so go figure. Why does he put stuff like this in his talk? Well, I was going through and I saw it, so what the heck. October 3rd, 1892. Got to lighten it up a bit. A race of giants in Old Gaul from London Globe. Now this is actually Scotland. And what we see here is Scottish skeletons double the normal size of us in height. That means they're 12 feet tall in mounds found in Scotland. Then 1894, March 5th, we have giants found near Serpent Mound, Ohio. And The skeletons were over 6 feet in length, which doesn't sound that impressive to us now, but apparently some of them were a lot bigger than that. They were found with strange tools. Serpent Mound is probably the coolest looking remaining mound that these giants built while they had colonized America, and they apparently at one time, pre-Atlantean catastrophe, had a huge civilization in America. That's what a lot of this stuff is Atlantean ruins. Now this is a drawing of the original Serpent Mound, but an older drawing shows that both sides of the eye were there. That's very likely the left eye of the Illuminati that they were drawing. This is the same group of people with the same ancient religion. See that eye? That's the snake with the serpent's tail coming off of it. And this is what it looks like now. That mound is about 50, 60 feet tall. It's a huge thing. You can walk all the way around it. You see the roads for cars that have been built so you can drive around it and look at it. So a lot of work was put into this. And there's many, many of these mounds in Ohio, West Virginia, or where a lot of them are. It's all been covered up and suppressed. Towanda Daily Review, October 25th, 1897. And this one says that you have a very large thigh bone where the total skeleton would have to be over 7 feet tall in an Indian mound. December 20th, 1897 now. A Wisconsin mound again is opened with an over 9 foot tall gigantic skeleton. Now some people get pissed off and they say, David, why are you going through so many of these? Well, I like to give you the fact that there's a lot of data for the skeptics. That's why I'm going through it quickly here. The skull was the size of half a bushel. A bushel is a really big barrel. So this thing was very large. Now we're getting towards the end of this now. September 7th, 1904. And this one was found, let's see, in New York, actually, down around New York City, in employ of the Harlem Railroad. Near Purdy's Station, there was an immense mound that they obviously got rid of to build New York City that had several skeletons of unusually giant size, 1904. So they wiped that out. May 4th, 1908. Giant skeletons found again. And this time, it's a cave in Mexico that had over 200 of these giant skeletons that were nearly 9 feet in height. And they say that this race antedated the Aztecs, because this was part of what was Atlantis before it was destroyed in the biblical flood that is reported in the Book of Enoch that was the Atlantean cataclysm. The femur alone reached up to the thigh of the guy who was doing this, and the skull was 18 inches long from the front to the back. So this was a very large humanoid. Then we have Washington Times, California, July 13th, 1908. And this one is of near and dear importance to all of us as Los Angeles locals, because they dug it up right out here on the beach. You can literally frickin' walk to the beach from this hotel. Literally walk to the beach. And right over there, they dug up 14 skeletons that were over 9 feet tall each. So these people had lived right here, right where we are now. 3 perfect specimens were brought to a lab in Santa Monica to be exhibited and studied scientifically, and of course this has all been swept under the rug. And we find out that Catalina Island, which as you probably know is directly right over there. You just take a little ferry and it's right down by the marina. You can take a ferry over to Catalina Island. It's a nice little vacation island that we have right here people like to go to. Get a load of this. 3 to 6 times larger than people now. They had double rows of teeth, red hair, and skulls 3 to 6 times the size of normal humans. There's Catalina Island. I can see it from my house, actually. This is in the late 19th century. And it says that they had dwarf mammoth bones that were roasted in ancient fire pits, eaten by human-like creatures who were giants and had 2 sets of teeth. And this is an article that basically describes what I'm about to show you here, which is that in Catalina Island, this is staggering, they found 3,781 giant skeletons, and the whole thing was covered up. They took all of them away. They're all hidden away. And what I heard from my space program people is that the Illuminati, the Masons, at one point were destroying these giant skeletons left and right. They just take boats out into the ocean and dump the skeletons into the water. They didn't want anybody to find this. Now, however, they treat these as very valuable ancient relics, and you get in a lot of trouble if you destroy them. So they're still being found, and anytime I've heard from some of my insiders, anytime people start to find this, you're in big trouble now. You try to publish it, oh wow, we made an archaeological discovery. Look out, because you're target number one. They're not going to like this. This is not something that's going to happen. Skulls up to 6 times the size of normal humans. Almost 4,000 skeletons found on Catalina. You'll never look at it the same way. I never look at it the same way after that. Now we're up to May 4th, 1912, one of the last ones. Again, Wisconsin, near Lake Delavan. And this one actually got coverage in other things. 18 skeletons found in this mound, in this case. And the head slopes straight back directly over the eye sockets, just like the Egyptian pharaoh heads. And this brings us to our next big thing. 1913, and we start to see the first of only very few pictures that ever have survived. And there's one of the pictures. Notice the elongated skull there on the left. Almost 10 feet tall, and they were found in caves in this case with elongated skulls. Now we're up to July 14th, 1916. A mound that was found where in this case? Binghamton, New York. So this is upstate New York. 700 years ago is when it was found. And we have another one here from this is the one that the article is talking about. It's actually in Pennsylvania. The article's from Binghamton. It was written in Binghamton. The actual mound was in Pennsylvania at Tioga Point, and they dug up 68 skeletons that were 7 feet or more in height. And it was believed to have been buried 700 years ago, around 1200 AD. Then we're getting right to the end. September 21st, 1916, they wrote up the same finding in the Wellsboro Gazette. Again, it's talking about Pennsylvania, the mound. And there's another one, which is in France, that apparently goes back 25,000 years. We don't know much more than that. I'd have to do more research, but it says skeletons of giant warriors. And they found the head, and they believe them to be 25,000 years old. Others were found in 1950 in Ireland by archaeologists, Superman-sized skeletons, as you can see right here. So this gets to the next big question, okay? Where are all the relics? We've got all these skeletons. Didn't anything survive? Aren't there any pictures? Isn't there anything cool we can look at? Yes. Thank God. I've combed the internet clean and found everything I could possibly think of. And there's not very many, but there's some that are pretty darn cool that I found. So this is from the San Antonio Express, early 20th century. And this is the skulls, and you can see, look on the right there, that one on the right is a lot larger than the ones on the left. The other two are of normal size. So you notice large cheekbones, really large, bulky jaw. And this, as you can see, you have a normal skull on the right there in the middle. That's number 2. Number 1 is one of these giants, really big jaw, much larger, and notice the shape of the skull. You got that elongated skull again, folks, except now they're a lot taller because these are the earlier ones before they interbred and their height keeps dropping. Now we have skulls of the Incas, which, as I was showing you before, are what happens once the height starts to drop. We saw lots of cool examples of those. These are more of our own height. Another one that is a photograph that we found, this is one of the mounds before it was destroyed. They're starting to excavate the structure. A lot of these mounds do look like pyramids, but they're made out of dirt. Many of them have been destroyed, plowed over, or just ignored as mountains. There's still a lot of them in Ohio, and as I said, West Virginia, which hardly anybody lives in West Virginia. It's a lot of empty land. So in this mound, they apparently found a molar, a big tooth. And this is the guy pointing to what they apparently proved was a molar. Look at how large that thing is compared to one of our teeth. That's pretty wild. This was the grave site in the mound that they found. This is a drawing of it that had a giant skeleton inside that enclave. Now, in South Africa, Michael Tellinger has been always showing us this giant footprint that he found. This is probably one of those 36-foot tall, one of the oldest ones to come here, way, way back when they had first driven the moon into Earth's orbit and they started to settle on Earth. That's probably the types that we're talking about, or maybe even before they really settled. Then we have Cleveland National Forest. Somebody found a footprint there from a giant human, obviously a lot larger. And of course, we have another footprint from Mount Blanco, Texas, with a nice picture of Coca-Cola. which, you know, if it was California, it would probably be green juice, but it's Texas. What do you expect? Very large footprint, which is totally to be expected. Now, we actually have some mummies that have been found. This one is Irish, 11 feet tall, that they put inside its own little sarcophagus. This apparently is a real image, and it's almost twice the height of us. Now, the Freemasons used to collect these and had galleries, and a couple of their pictures probably were originally held in private collections and then got leaked. So here's a Masonic photo that was probably never meant to be seen by people outside the Masons, and notice how tall that skeleton is compared to him. And there's the two pillars, the Masonic lore, Boaz and Joachim. And then notice also there's another extraterrestrial skeleton on the left there that's very short. So this probably was never supposed to see the light of day, and here's actually the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, visiting the giant skeleton. Again, probably never was supposed to see the light of day. This 9-foot mummy was found in 1895 in San Diego, and here was a newspaper illustration of it, of a guy posing next to it, about 9 feet tall. And there is an actual photo, a real photograph of the mummy. You can see it had long hair, and these were believed to be an Indian tribe because they mixed in with the Native Americans. And apparently they stopped being cannibals in some cases so they could stay alive, because if they acted like cannibals, they were going to get killed off. They'd get scared into caves and killed and eaten. Or just killed. Probably not eaten. That's their job. That's what they were doing. Here's another example of a very large mummy, and the human probably only goes up to her waist. Oh no, she's not quite that tall. There she is in the sarcophagus there. So she's probably more of like a 7-footer, but this is one of the mummies, again, that we find. Now here's a guy, this is really interesting. This is another probably 8-foot mummy, something like that. She's about 2 feet taller than him with her head off to the side. Notice the skull. You see something odd about her head, folks? You see how wide that skull is? Does that look like one of our skulls? Heck no! That skull is really wide, and obviously it extends out into the back. So this is one of the best examples that we've got that survived, showing that gigantic skull. Now, this is a write-up from that same finding, and we don't have time to go through all this. This is another one that was found in Europe, and again, there's not very many of these, but here you have a series of razor clams that have been put over the eyes. Now, the razor clam usually grows to be about this big, okay? So if you understand that and you look at this, those eye sockets are literally about 5 inches tall. So this is a very large head that the razor clams just happen to give us a size reference for. Here's another one that was found in Oregon. Again, you can see this is probably based on some of the signs and the things. It looks like it's about double the size of anybody else's skull. All of the museums that have had these on display, they've all been contacted. They've all been silenced. They've all been threatened. Unfortunately, there's no place you can go to see the real thing anymore. And then this one is really bizarre. This was a guy who actually went to Egypt, and a grave robber in 1998 found a mummy of a truly gigantic human with green skin and just hacked the finger off and actually allowed this guy to film it, and he wanted to come back and buy it, but he wasn't able to do so. And so what you're going to see here is how frickin' large this finger is, because there is an Egyptian pound. That's about, it's actually bigger than a $20 bill. It's taller. So the whole finger is literally like about this long. So those hands would be huge. This has got to be one of those original Osiris-type 36-footers like the original Sumerian Anunnaki that this grave robber happened to find. Unfortunately, we never heard from him again. So, surprise, surprise. So here's another shot of Osiris, those types. Notice how much taller he is than the woman that is standing behind him. Sitting down, he's already the same height that she is, so standing up, he'd probably be almost twice as tall. That's probably one of those types. So again, here's the size comparison chart of the different types that have been found on Earth, going from 6 feet all the way up to 36 feet in height. And this is a reconstruction, another one of very few that have survived, of one of the femur bones that was found in one of these giant digs. This guy was around 14 to 16 feet tall, so that's a very unusual one, bigger than usual, but that's the first shot I ever found years ago of this kind of phenomenon. And this is also apparently real from a Middle Eastern dig of some of their original battle axes that the giants used to hold and carry. And this, believe it or not, is actually a diagram where every single one of those purple push pins is a different documented site. This is done by researchers that have compiled all this together. Every one of those purple dots is where one of these giant skeleton sites were found. So they had extensively colonized the Americas at one point. So I hope you can see that what we're dealing with here is a very fascinating investigation that is far-reaching in scope, that has huge implications for what's going on in today's world. And all of the things that I'm telling you are part of this long-term battle for the future of the human civilization. What are we going to do on Earth? Where are we going? This geometric energy that we're made from has been around the whole time, and there's lots and lots of different people out there in the cosmos. We are made to ascend. The Illuminati cabal claims to be the descendants of these giants that were extraterrestrials, and I've now charted out the whole history that's never before been presented to the public. What you have just seen here is the very first time that anybody outside of a small circle of elite has ever gotten to hear and see the information that I have just presented to you. Yes, indeed. Where do I think all this is going? I think that we are on the threshold of a supernatural change in human evolution, and I'm going to be doing more of this kind of work as time goes on. You can read my books, Source Field Investigations and Synchronicity Key. Check out my show on Gaiam TV, Wisdom Teachings. It's a half an hour a week. And tonight, actually, believe it or not, is the night that the 100th episode aired of my show. 100 half hours. So, none of this stuff that I just showed you is on Gaiam TV. And it's getting harder and harder to outdo myself now, because so many of the conferences that people used to pay $300 to see are all free on Gaiam TV now. At least the 10-day trial is free. Then it's $9.99 a month. So anyway, there's a lot more to discuss, and I've done so much work. You can read my articles. I've done arguably more free stuff than anybody else in my field. There's a whole book on my website called Financial Tyranny, read by 1.5 million people. That's free. Totally exposes the Illuminati, all the stuff they're doing with the financial system. And the subject of the ascension is really big. I want to thank all of you for coming here. This has been totally awesome. I'm still alive. We made it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.